Yes, good evening. My name is Catherine Rankin. I am a nursing student with National American University, and I have been doing my clinical at a facility in Boone, North Carolina. My preceptor, his name is Jeff Walker, and we've had an interesting experience throughout our clinical rotation. And some of the things that I had planned for the students were the nurses and the medical staff are the primary providers within this correctional setting. And this is a requirement for my master's. It's called a Capstone Practicum um, for nursing students. One of the things that I basically learned myself throughout this process was I tried to analyze caregiver skills by the staff there at the correctional facility. Basically, what I did was I did evidence-based research, and that research consisted of a solid knowledge and expertise, including decision making, which is needed to optimize the nursing setting and the Nursing Practice Act, as well as to promote positive health outcomes within that correctional setting. The focus of the practicum was to educate, to engage the students in mentoring. I basically was a facilitator, and I observed the students. I went over my teaching plan. I discussed skills and how to promote or to execute those skills in a local detention correctional facility. The teaching and mentoring practicum allowed me to engage in my teaching experience, and I had a chance to get to know the caregivers as well as law enforcement staff there, as well as the custodial staff at the facility. The nursing supervisor, she was engaged in this process. The first day was an introductory period where I met the sheriff of the facility, and I went around and I looked at all the different rooms in the facility. I basically was given a tour by the staff there, and we talked about some of our goals. We talked about what was important to me as an educator and what I was going to be doing there. Everyone was receptive at the beginning, and as we went through the process for about 2 or 3 weeks, we basically became family, and I got to know them pretty well. Through critical reflection and application, they were able to enrich their personal goals and develop personal and professional development in ways that help them to enhance their jobs. I went into the lab. We basically had our clinical sessions. We discussed what works and what doesn't work. We applied skills in professional development in workshops in the classroom. We were given the opportunity to demonstrate exemplary role modeling behavior. Through the role modeling behavior, we basically got in small groups, and we discussed how the staff interacts with the clients, with the inmate, especially in a setting that it's supposed to be like a rigid environment, because those were inmates, and we were trying to teach the staff how to interact with them, as well as the teaching opportunity provided me a challenge and an opportunity to further my growth in teaching and my pedagogy. And I tried to teach the necessary skills for the correctional employees to engage therapeutically with the violent or the abusive client, while recognizing that incarceration can be very stressful to that inmate, as well as to the staff who is providing the care for inmate with or without mental illness, because most of these clients, they were mentally ill, and they were sometimes combative, and at times those inmates experienced sudden shock of just being separated from their families and from other sources of social support. And they had anxiety over their trial or even the sentencing phase. Some of my learning objectives that I had to work with was reflection, integration, culmination, and transition. I demonstrated knowledge and competency with strong assessment and clinical skills during my observation of the staff. I performed my nurse educator role under the supervision of my preceptor. I identified my personal goals for learning for the Capstone experience as well as theoretical based competencies. That framework provided me with evidence of interpersonal learning, which I tried to incorporate with the staff as much as I could in layman's terms. The educational approach was grounded in principles of adult learning because these were adults. They were not, some of them were college educated and some weren't. But I had a total of 9 students in my class, and my teaching strategies were more effective and intercorrelated. There was a direct relevance between interpersonal educational experiences and future practice. Some of the activities that I planned between myself and the preceptor, we tried to foster open communications between myself, my preceptor, and the students. We developed mutual respect for each other. We shared decision making. We achieved quality patient care through the interviewing process. We learned through simulation in the practice setting. We did role play. We watched PowerPoints. We discussed what worked, and some things didn't work, and some people were uncomfortable with the way that they had been doing it wrong, but that was okay. Nobody has, the right answers, but we tried to make a good impression with the client. We got out there, and everybody worked hard, and some of the cuisine competencies was communication. That was one of the things that we mostly centered around was competency, and that supported our team approach with the client. And how the effectiveness of learning-centered simulation interventions. We discussed how do you talk to a client? How do you interact with a client? How do you not become upset when you're speaking with a client? How do we tone it down and make sure that that client has established trust with us to where they could trust us? How do we interact socially? We use proficient communication skills as well as clinical skills. The skills we used were in a safe and non-threatening environment. The staff evaluated and provided feedback for enhanced learning. As far as my personal practicum self-experiences, psychiatric nursing, it was a setting of psychiatry. The standards, we had to go by these standards which were utilized in the criteria of the facility. We used Cagney's 9 events of instructions, and that was interesting. And we basically I tried to stick with the C&E examination blueprint and facilitate, which was facilitation of learning development and socialization. I researched information about the outcomes of care for the population in which we were serving, and that was the correctional setting. Utilized tools such